In this fictional retelling of the modern monarchy's darkest hour, the tension inside Britain trembled like a wire pulled too tight, vibrating with secrets, whispered confrontations, and decisions so heavy they threatened to bend the crown itself. It began quietly, with a single sentence spoken behind closed doors at Kensington Palace, a sentence that would ignite the fuse beneath everything the royal family thought was stable. Enough is enough. Fictional or not, the words were sharp, cold, and carried the kind of finality that could slice through centuries of protocol. Prince William, normally the embodiment of calm restraint, had reached a limit he didn't know existed. The fictional whispers portray him pacing his private study, weight pressing onto him like an invisible shroud as he finally admitted to confidence that the chaos surrounding Harry and Meghan had spiraled beyond recovery. And in this reimagined world, the decision that formed in his mind was one no future king had dared say aloud: the HRH titles must go, and the monarchy must be protected at any cost. Whether Parliament or Palace acted first no longer mattered. What mattered was the survival of the institution he had been raised to inherit. In this fictional universe, London simmered beneath grey clouds as rumors spread through Westminster. Lawmakers marched through ancient hallways with a new, electric tension, their voices low but urgent. Something unprecedented was taking shape. Something the monarchy feared, the government relished, and the world would soon watch unfold like a political earthquake. Parliament, in this reimagining, no longer tiptoed around royal privilege. Instead, top MPs discreetly drafted the outline of a bill, one that would give elected officials the authority to strip royal titles from those who no longer serve the crown. In this fictional scenario, the bill wasn't aimed broadly. Everyone knew who it was targeting. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, once celebrated as the glamorous future of a modern monarchy, had become the center of a fictional constitutional showdown. Their titles, Duke and Duchess of Sussex, shimmered like fading gold, repeatedly polished for Hollywood cameras, Netflix contracts, and lucrative interviews in this version of events. But now, in this dramatized retelling, those same titles had become symbols of controversy, parody, and political irritation. Inside this fictional story, Buckingham Palace stood eerily quiet, as though the walls themselves sensed a storm approaching. King Charles, more fragile in this narrative than the world knew, retreated into his private rooms as advisors brought him growing stacks of reports, parliamentary motions, and PR warnings. His hands trembled, not from age, but from the impossible choice squeezing his heart. Should he protect the institution he'd sworn to uphold since childhood, or shield the son he'd sung to sleep decades ago, long before scandal had divided the family like a fault line? Fictionally torn, Charles paced in circles, knowing that whatever decision he made would define his reign. The monarchy required strength. A father required compassion. But a king could not be both, not today. And so he hesitated, doing nothing, hoping silence would act as a temporary shield. But silence in the face of political fire is like standing still in a burning room. Eventually, the flames arrive. Meanwhile, in this fictional retelling, the heart of the storm burned thousands of miles away in Montecito, where Harry and Meghan, unaware of the tidal wave building in London, were already battling their own private panic. The moment fictional news leaked that Parliament was discussing royal title reform, Meghan reportedly felt the floor shift beneath her. Every deal, every magazine spread, every scripted speech she had crafted around the persona of the Duchess of Sussex suddenly felt like an empire built on sand. A fictional team of advisors scrambled. Lawyers warned of brand dilution. PR managers insisted on emergency strategy sessions, and consultants begged for messaging that could soften public perception. The fictional Meghan, who always understood the power of names, titles, and identity, found herself staring into a mirror. No tiara, no HRH, no royal sheen, just Meghan. And in this reimagining, the thought chilled her. Harry's fictional reaction was worse. The fictional moment he heard Parliament's intent, dread washed over him like icy water. Without his title, without Duke of Sussex, without the royal connection, Everything he'd built in America, his influence, his platform, his unique status, risked collapsing. In this dramatized version, Harry began making private calls, something he hadn't done in years. Not through staff, not through official channels. Personally, his voice cracked on voicemail messages to old palace contacts. He pleaded for a meeting with his father. He hoped William might intervene. But in this story, William was the very force pushing the movement forward. And Harry sensed, for the first time in his life, what it felt like to be completely out of royal protection. The fictional tension hardened even further when whispers emerged that the proposed reforms could affect Archie and Lilibet. In this fictional interpretation, the idea that their children, too young to understand the meaning of titles, could lose what little connection they had to their royal heritage sent Meghan spiraling into a fictional panic no PR strategy could control. In this dramatized retelling, she saw it not as politics but as punishment, as though the monarchy were reaching across continents to erase her children's place in history. Harry, in this fictional portrayal, felt guilt like a physical weight crushing his ribs. He left to protect them, yet now, that protection seemed to be the very thing putting their titles at risk. And while the fictional Sussex household trembled in quiet chaos, the machinery of London moved forward with ruthless efficiency. Behind closed doors, MPs drafted what they called the One Bill Solution, a single, sweeping fictional reform capable of redefining the monarchy in one decisive stroke. Titles could be removed. Roles could be reclassified. Inactive royals could lose privileges. It would be a political cleansing, one long overdue in the eyes of supporters. Critics called it a fictional constitutional betrayal, but the momentum was too strong. In this story, Britain was tired of drama, tired of scandal, tired of a monarchy that felt more like a tabloid series than a source of stability. Parliament was ready to act. And within this fictional narrative, William watched it unfold with a chilling calmness. His fictional role in the shadows was subtle but powerful. Quiet meetings, unrecorded dinners, strategic silences. He never issued orders, but MPs knew his stance. The future king supported reform. He wanted a monarchy cleansed of exploitation and chaos before it became his responsibility. Personal feelings sharpened his resolve. Years of fictional betrayal, exposed texts, televised accusations, and memoir revelations had built a hardened shell around him. This wasn't revenge, he told himself in this dramatized version. It was restoration. If the monarchy was to survive his reign, distractions had to be removed, even if those distractions shared his blood. But the fictional cost? Immense. Because in this version of events, Charles knew the world would blame him, his inaction, his hesitation, his fear of being portrayed as a cruel father. He understood that once Parliament struck, he would no longer be the monarch who controlled the destiny of his family. The government would, and nothing terrified him more. And so, as London braced for an explosion that would rewrite royal history, the fictional monarchy found itself caught between duty and blood, tradition and modernity, loyalty and survival. No matter what came next, no side would escape unscathed. Not the king who hesitated, not the prince who pushed, not the couple who left, not the children caught in a political hurricane, and not the nation watching centuries of royal identity hang by a single parliamentary vote. The room fell into a heavy, electric silence after Harry stormed out, and Meghan just stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door as if willing it to swing open again, as if he would return and apologize first, despite the fact that she had been the one pushing, needling, provoking him in ways she knew would cut deep. But when the door didn't budge, when the echo of his retreat faded into the distant halls of the house they no longer considered a home, something in her expression shifted, desperation flickering beneath the mask of confidence she always wore for the cameras, the staff, the world. She exhaled sharply and walked to the window, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she touched the cold glass, watching the distant road where Harry's car had vanished only moments before. She hated when he left like that, hated losing control of the narrative, hated the idea that somewhere he might be replaying every word she said, twisting it, letting it build into resentment that would eventually be used against her during an argument, an interview, or worse, a revelation to someone outside their curated bubble. She knew Harry was emotional, volatile even, but it was that same volatility she relied on to pull him back, to make him choose her again and again. She whispered his name under her breath, half in anger, half in longing, because she knew the story wasn't over. Not tonight, not ever. Meanwhile, Harry was driving far too fast down the coastal road, the wind slapping through the half-open window, his knuckles white around the steering wheel. His heart was hammering not just from the argument, but from what it had triggered inside him. Old memories, unresolved fears, the feeling of being trapped in a cycle he thought he had escaped. He hated himself for raising his voice, hated how easily she could provoke him, hated that she used Diana's memories so openly, so strategically, as though pain was a currency she could spend whenever she needed leverage. But beneath that anger was something softer, something much more dangerous. The fear that she was right, the fear that he was slipping back into the shadows of a past he thought he had healed from. He pulled over at a lookout, the ocean stretching endlessly before him, and he stepped out, letting the cold air hit him. He pressed his hands to his face, breathing deeply, trying to calm the storm inside him. He wondered if this was all falling apart, if they were reaching the point where love wasn't enough, where understanding had run dry, where two people so deeply entangled in each other's stories were now becoming the villains in each other's lives. He didn't want to believe it, but doubt crept in anyway, slow and poisonous. Back at the house, Meghan paced the living room like a caged flame, her every step sharp, controlled, never frantic. She would never let herself look frantic, even alone. She picked up her phone twice, ready to call him, but each time her pride forced her thumb away from the screen. She hated apologizing. She hated admitting she had crossed a line. But she also knew Harry better than anyone else, knew that if she didn't catch him while he was emotional, if she let him sit too long in that silence, he would begin rewriting the argument in his head, turning himself into the victim, turning her into the villain, and she could not allow that. She finally grabbed her coat and left the house, the night swallowing her as she slid behind the wheel of her car and sped off in the direction she knew he would go. She knew his hiding places better than he did. She had mapped out his emotional escapes long before he noticed the patterns himself. Harry didn't hear her approach until he saw the reflection of her car lights across the water. His stomach tightened. Part of him hoped she wouldn't follow, and another part prayed she would. As she stepped out of the car, the wind whipping her hair across her face, she didn't say anything right away, and he didn't turn to look at her. The silence between them stretched, thick as fog. Then she spoke, her voice lower, calmer, every word carefully measured. She told him she didn't mean to hurt him, that everything she said came from a place of fear. Fear of losing him, fear of being misunderstood, fear of the world twisting their story into something ugly. Harry almost laughed because the world didn't twist anything, they created most of the storms themselves. But he didn't laugh. He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the crashing waves. Meghan walked closer, standing beside him but not touching him, giving him just enough space to breathe. She knew contact too soon would push him away, but distance too long would break him. She told him she needed him, that he was stronger than he believed, that she wasn't invoking Diana's memory to hurt him, but because she understood what she meant to him, what her loss had carved into him. Harry finally turned, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with unshed grief and years of unresolved resentment, not just toward her, but toward the life he had lived, the one he had fled, the one he had built with Meghan that sometimes felt like a sanctuary and other times like a battlefield. He told her she couldn't keep using his mother as a weapon. She took the blow quietly, letting his words settle between them. She didn't deny it, didn't deflect, because she knew if she argued now, if she spun this into another emotional debate, she would lose him for the night and possibly longer. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice softening as she said she would do better, that she would be gentler, that she knew he carried too much already. Harry's resistance cracked, just slightly, but enough for her to step into the small opening he gave. She reached for his hand, and after a long moment, he let her take it. The waves crashed below them, echoing like applause or warning sirens. It was hard to tell which. Their silhouettes merged in the faint glow of the moon, two figures bound together by love, fear, ambition, wounds, and the stories they told themselves about who they were and who they needed to be. Neither spoke again for several minutes, the silence finally settling into something less hostile, something almost peaceful. But beneath that calm, something else stirred, because both of them knew this moment was only a pause, not a resolution. They had stepped back from the edge tonight, but the cliff was still there, waiting for the next storm. And deep down, in the secret part of themselves they never acknowledged aloud, they both sensed that storm was already on its way. They drove back in near silence, the road curling through the dark like a question neither of them wanted to answer. The tension between Harry and Meghan didn't vanish. It simply shifted into a quieter shape, something simmering under the surface, waiting for the right moment to erupt again. Harry kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight, the replay of their earlier argument flickering through his mind like a broken projector. Meghan watched him from the passenger seat, her mind working faster than her expression betrayed. She was calculating, not maliciously, but out of survival, instinct, and the constant need to stay in control of a life that always seemed one headline away from collapse. She knew Harry's emotional patterns like a script, knew the scenes that would follow if she didn't manage this moment carefully. And so she softened her posture, the slightest tilt of her body toward him, her voice gentle as she spoke at last, saying she didn't want the night to end like this, that they deserved peace. Just for a few hours. Harry didn't answer immediately, but his shoulders loosened just a little, a small sign she could still reach him. When they arrived home, the house felt colder than when they had left, almost as if it had absorbed the fight and now reflected it back at them. Harry walked ahead of her, his footsteps heavy against the wooden floorboards. Meghan paused at the door, looking around at the half-lit rooms, the shadows stretching across the walls. She hated when the house felt like this, empty, hollow, a reminder of all the things they had tried to build but couldn't quite hold on to. She followed him into the living room, where he stood near the fireplace, staring at the unlit logs. For a moment, he looked young again, lost in a way that made her chest tighten. She walked up behind him, placing her hand gently against his back, letting the warmth of her touch ease into his skin. He didn't pull away, which was enough. Harry finally spoke, his voice rough from restraint. He said he was tired of being the villain in every narrative, tired of feeling trapped between loyalty to the past and responsibility to the future, tired of trying to carve out a life that felt like it belonged to him. Meghan listened quietly, her eyes softening, because she knew that beneath all the drama, confusion, and miscommunication, he was a man still haunted by a lifetime of being watched, judged, and shaped by forces he never chose. She told him that he wasn't the villain, not to her, not to their children, not to anyone who really understood him. But as she said it, she felt a flicker of doubt deep in her chest, because sometimes even she wasn't sure who they were anymore or who they were becoming. They sat together on the couch, close but not touching, the air between them heavy with unspoken truths. Harry leaned forward, his hands clasped, his gaze fixed on the floor. He admitted that he felt like everything was slipping away, not just them, but the purpose, the meaning, the story they had once convinced themselves they were writing. Meghan took a slow breath, choosing her words with care. She told him that every couple had storms, that they had faced worse, that the world always magnified their problems into spectacle. She reminded him that they had survived public backlash, family estrangement, media wars, storms that would have destroyed other couples. Harry nodded, but she could see the uncertainty still simmering, like embers that refused to die. Then Meghan shifted slightly, turning her body toward him, letting her voice lower into the tone she used only when she needed to reach the parts of him no one else could touch. She told him that she loved him, that she chose him every day, even on days like this. She told him he wasn't alone, not now, not ever. Harry's breath hitched, his eyes closing briefly, because he wanted to believe her so desperately. He wanted to believe there was still a version of their life that made sense. He reached for her hand, and when their fingers intertwined, something in the room seemed to settle. But the calm was fragile, resting on cracks neither of them had the strength to repair tonight. Later, after they had gone to bed, after Harry fell into a restless, uneasy sleep, Meghan lay awake beside him, staring up at the ceiling. The moon cast pale light through the curtains, illuminating her face in a way that made her look both vulnerable and unreadable. Her mind was already spinning toward tomorrow, toward the press, toward their public image, toward the next step in controlling the chaos before it controlled them. She loved Harry, deeply and fiercely, but love wasn't the only thing that drove her. There was ambition, fear, pride, and a desire to reshape her life into something no one could take from her. She had learned long ago that the world didn't hand you peace. You carved it, you fought for it. You protected it with everything you had. She turned to look at Harry, sleeping beside her, his breathing uneven. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, her touch tender in a way she rarely allowed herself to show. She whispered that they would be okay, even though her voice carried more determination than certainty. Because she wasn't sure. Because something between them had cracked tonight, and cracks had a way of spreading if left unattended. And somewhere deep within her, beneath all the strategies and instincts and emotional armor, she felt a tremor of fear. Fear that this was only the beginning of a storm she didn't yet know how to navigate. The morning arrived not with calm, but with a subtle, disquieting shift in the atmosphere of the house, as though the walls themselves had woken up, holding their breath. Harry stirred first, blinking against the pale light creeping between the curtains. His head felt heavy, as though the lingering pieces of last night's argument had settled deep into his bones. He glanced over at Meghan, who lay perfectly still beside him, her breathing measured, her expression unreadable even in sleep, or whatever part of her consciousness she allowed herself to retreat into. For a moment, Harry simply watched her, searching her face for something he couldn't quite name: reassurance, forgiveness, understanding. Maybe even the love he feared was slipping through the cracks of their lives. But all he saw was a woman who had mastered the art of being composed even in vulnerability, which somehow both comforted and frightened him. He slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake her, needing space, needing air, needing clarity. He walked downstairs, the house eerily silent, the kind of silence that amplifies every echo, every creak, every unspoken word that had been swallowed the night before. He made coffee, though he barely tasted the bitterness as the steam curled around his hands. He stared out the kitchen window, watching the fog slowly lift from the garden, revealing the outlines of their life, beautiful but fragile, curated yet complicated, like a painting beginning to show its cracks beneath the varnish. He wondered how much longer they could keep pretending everything was fine, how much longer they could keep spinning their own story while living a completely different one behind closed doors. Upstairs, Meghan woke slowly, feeling the emptiness beside her before her eyes even opened. She knew Harry had left the bed not out of avoidance, but because he needed to process things alone, a habit she had learned to accept, even if she disliked it. She sat up, brushing her hair away from her face, replaying every moment of the previous night. She had said the right things. She had softened when she needed to, apologized in the ways she knew mattered to him, but she still felt the residue of the argument clinging to her. She didn't regret following him to the lookout, didn't regret the reconciliation they'd managed to build, but she hated how easily everything between them could crumble. She hated that their love felt both powerful and precarious, something breathtaking yet breakable at the same time. She made her way downstairs, her bare feet silent against the steps, her expression calm, but her mind already calculating the emotional terrain she was about to enter. When she saw Harry standing by the window, shoulders tense, eyes distant, she paused for just a moment. She studied him the way one might study a piece of art, looking for the details that revealed the truth beneath the surface. Then she walked toward him, deliberately softening her posture, her voice gentle as she greeted him. He turned slightly, his eyes meeting hers, and something in his expression shifted. Wariness mixed with wanting, the same mix she'd become accustomed to navigating. They talked quietly at first, about small things, the kind of meaningless morning conversation couples use when they are trying to avoid the real conversation looming beneath it all. But Meghan could feel the weight of last night pressing into the spaces between their sentences. She eventually sat beside him, her hand brushing lightly against his arm, offering a connection he neither reached for nor resisted. She told him she had been thinking that they needed to take a breath from everything, work, the press, the interviews, the appearances, because the pressure was crushing them. Harry listened, nodding slowly, because she was right. The world outside their walls had become a relentless storm, and they had been trying to outrun it rather than shelter from it. But in the middle of her calming reasoning, Harry suddenly asked the question she didn't expect, the question that stopped her cold. "Do you think we're losing ourselves?" It hung in the air like a suspended blade, sharp, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Meghan felt her breath catch for just a fraction of a second before she responded. She told him they weren't losing themselves. They were evolving, navigating unfamiliar territory, learning how to be stronger together. Her voice was steady, confident, but Harry heard the tiny hesitation she couldn't hide, and that hesitation landed in his chest like a stone. He wanted desperately to believe her, but something deep inside him whispered that they were changing in ways neither of them fully understood. They spent the rest of the morning together, each trying to rebuild a sense of normalcy. But everything felt slightly off balance, like standing on a ship that hadn't quite steadied after a storm. Meghan suggested they take the kids out for the day, do something grounding, something real, something that reminded them of why they had chosen this life together. Harry agreed, grateful for the distraction. But even as they prepared to leave, even as they stepped outside into the crisp air, even as they buckled the children into their seats, the tension lingered, thin, invisible, but unmistakable. And then, just as they were pulling out of the driveway, Harry's phone lit up with a notification. He glanced at it, expecting something trivial, but his heart dropped into his stomach when he read the headline flashing across the screen. Meghan saw the look on his face instantly, tightening jaw, widening eyes, the flicker of panic, and she asked what happened. He hesitated for a moment, then turned the screen toward her. It was a breaking news alert, the kind that spreads like wildfire within minutes. A leak. A story. A private moment captured by someone who should never have been watching. A distorted version of last night's argument, twisted into something far more explosive. Meghan's face went still, her expression hardening as she read. Harry felt the world tilt, the fragile peace they'd spent all night building shattering in an instant. Because this wasn't just a story, it was ammunition, a spark thrown into the dry grass of an already burning field. Meghan closed her eyes, inhaling slowly, the calm before a far more dangerous storm. Harry felt the familiar dread creeping in, the dread he thought he had left behind when he walked away from the palace and everything that came with it. They hadn't even reached the end of the driveway when their phones started vibrating again and again, the world already reacting, already dissecting, already choosing sides. Slowly, Harry put the car in park. Slowly, Meghan lifted her head, her eyes sharper than they had been all morning. And in that moment, without either of them having to say it, they both knew whatever storm was coming now would make last night look like nothing.